Hi, Colin. Good morning. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much. It's morning for me. I think it's late evening for you.
Exactly, of course. I know it's morning for you, but it's evening here. So, how are you today and how's your morning so far?
My morning has been okay. Yes, this is the main focus of my morning. So I'm glad everything could connect without any problems. But yes, going well so far. Nothing much to report so far this morning.
Oh, that's great to hear that. And I'm so thankful to you that you joined on time. So, yes, Colin, as we are meeting for the first time, would you mind telling something about yourself for the viewers? It would be very good for them to know about you.
Um, well, I'm an English teacher by profession. I my first experience of teaching English was just after I finished university, actually. My first job after university was in Chile in South America. And I worked for a newspaper, and that was my main job. But I also had the opportunity to teach some people privately, doing private lessons. So I would go to their apartment or I would go to their office. Sometimes I would teach small groups. And that gave me my first kind of experience of teaching English as a second language. Growing up, I didn't have a lot of opportunity to talk to people who were not native speakers. Where I'm from in the northwest of Scotland, there's very few people who are not native speakers. So through that experience of living in South America, it made me think, okay, this is possibly an interesting career. I get to talk to lots of interesting people, and I can provide value to them. For them, learning English was very important for their careers. Most of them were business people, so they needed English for their careers or their businesses. So that's where it started a long, long time ago.
Oh, that's great to know about your career. You started as an English teacher. So, where are you right now? As I know you're in Mexico, but how long have you been there and how's your experience there?
Yes, so I'm in Mexico City, and I've been here about 6 months. So still quite
Oh,
new, still learning a lot. So yes, 6 months. So before I moved here, I had been in Japan. I was in Japan for 12 years in
oh, that's
Tokyo.
great. So, how was
So
your experience being in Japan? Because 12 years, it's a long time, right?
it is a long time. In fact, in total, I've lived in Japan for about 16 years. So
Wow.
when I was still quite young, I was probably 25, I moved to Japan. I was part of something called the JET program, the Japan Exchange and Teaching Program. And this is a program where the Japanese government brings native speakers into the country and you teach at usually elementary schools or junior high schools, sometimes at high schools, but always in the countryside. So you're not in the big cities. The big cities have enough uh, English teachers, I think, maybe, but in the countryside, there's not so many people who can teach English. So I was sent to the deep Japanese countryside, but I had a great time. It was one of the best experiences of my life, living among the rice fields and the mountains. It was a beautiful experience. So I had 4 years there, like I said, teaching elementary school, junior high school level, but I wanted to teach adults. Teaching kids is fun. What was fun for me for a while, but it becomes a little bit repetitive. So
Exactly.
it can be. So I decided to go back and get a master's degree in English teaching as a foreign language, and then I was able to return to Japan and teach at a higher level. So I was teaching, first of all, I was teaching academic English. So these were Japanese graduates, so people who had graduated from university in Japan, but they wanted to go to the UK to study. a master's degree.
Mhm.
So they needed to, they already had good English, but there's a difference between good English and academic, very precise language that you need in an academic setting. So I did that for a few years, and then I started working at universities in Tokyo.
Oh, that's
So
great. So, and how did you enjoy that Japanese culture? And because you were there for 16 years, so
mhm.
I think, and you were into deep into that rural area of Japan, as you said, not into big cities. So, how
Mhm.
did you enjoy that the core of the culture of Japan?
I think I had a very different experience to a lot of people who visit Japan for a holiday, for example. If you go to Japan for a holiday, you might visit the big cities and you see that side of it. But going to the countryside, it's a completely different experience. I think one thing I was very grateful for was I was able to learn the language much more quickly in the countryside because there are fewer people who spoke English. So I had to really learn as quickly as possible to communicate with my colleagues and just to live daily life. It was very, very important. I think there are many people who move to Japan, live in the big cities, and they don't need to learn Japanese to that level because usually there's somebody somewhere who can speak English with them. So
Yes.
that's one aspect I think I was very grateful for. And making connections with people as well, because I think again in a small town or even a village really where I was living, you see the same people very often.
Mhm.
Whereas in a big city, it's easy to feel lost, and you never see people. You don't see people every day, but in the countryside, you'll see people regularly. If you look like me and you're a little bit taller than the average person in Japan, it's very easy for people to remember you. So they see you once and they'll probably remember you. So yeah, there were many positives from living in the countryside. So I wish people had more opportunities to go out and spend a long time in the countryside and get to know the culture.
Exactly. Of course, that is the right place to understand the culture. In the cities, of course, now I feel every city is the same. Even though in the UK, US, all same kind of things you see. But when you go
Mhm.
to this actually the rural areas or countryside of the country, so then you understand that the culture shock and you see different things, many different things. I would say same here in India. People
Mhm.
visit Mumbai or Delhi or like Kolkata. So they see the same kind of culture everybody is following nowadays. But when you come to the village, you see many different things, and they are completely new for all those people, right? So another question. Yes, go on.
No, it's something that I've noticed just in the 25 years that I've been traveling. I would say in the past, you went to another country, you went to another city, and it felt different. But now
Mhm.
you can travel between major cities around the world, and they're very similar. The high street, the main shopping street, will have the same brands, the same coffee shops, the same restaurants. So that was different even in my lifetime, 20 years ago.
Yes, exactly. You are absolutely right. So nowadays it's same. That's what I said. The same brands in Mumbai, same brands in maybe in
Mm.
London, the posh streets or main streets. So another question goes to you related to the language. How many languages do you know so far?
Um, Japanese, I was able to learn Japanese to a good level, and Spanish is it's a very interesting thing learning Spanish after learning Japanese. For me, as an English speaker, Japanese was a challenging language to learn. I remember the first time looking at a text of Japanese and just thinking, I don't know where to start with this. Um, so Japanese was a big challenge, even even after 12 years, that you still have challenging moments. So learning Spanish is interesting because I can look at it and I can generally read and understand basically what is being talked about in the text. The speed that people speak at, that's more of a challenge. Again, native speakers will just speak at 100 miles an hour, and it can be quite difficult to catch. But I would say that Spanish is much more enjoyable for me to study because I can just being able to recognize the letters. You know, they use the Roman alphabet. I mean, that's a big help for me. And I would say culturally, I think one of the things that makes learning a language easier is if you can find something in that culture that you enjoy. It could be reading, it could be watching movies, listening to music, could be anything. And for me, I was never a big fan of the Japanese manga or anime or those kind of things. So that was not something I could kind of lose myself in and really kind of enjoy the language. But I would say in Spanish, I'm able to find more because I think, yeah, they're a bit more similar culturally. Maybe there's more of a European side to that that is easier for me to access. But yes, learning Spanish, it feels like a vacation after studying Japanese.
Exactly, that's great. So, as you said, like Spanish and Japanese, and what about like English was your first language, or there was any particular, I would say, any other language in
Mm.
Scotland where you were raised?
Yeah,
Scottish?
that's a good question. So where I'm from in the northwest of Scotland, there's a language used called Gaelic. So Gaelic, Gaelic. And at one point it was widely spoken across Scotland, but it was pushed kind of out of Scotland by the English. This is I don't want to get into a history lesson, but Scotland and England fought for many years, hundreds of years, but the Gaelic language was pushed to the north and to the west. Basically, there was, I think, the mountains kind of created the barrier. So beyond the mountains, people could continue speaking Gaelic, but everything up to the mountains, that became English language territory. So where I'm from, people still learn Gaelic as their first language, and they learn English at school, which is kind of interesting. And there are even people who, there are schools that do everything in Gaelic. So you can do your whole school education in Gaelic. But anybody who speaks Gaelic, any adult who speaks Gaelic, will speak English as well. So,
Okay.
So I did grow up in a kind of bilingual setting in that sense. And I think it probably helped me when I began learning languages myself, because I was used to hearing different ways of saying things, hearing different grammatical structures, and also even pronunciation. So there are some
Exactly.
sounds in Gaelic that are not in English. And for me, that's a big
Right.
part of learning a language. You need to understand that you will have to make different sounds to pronounce words correctly. So that was kind of the environment that I grew up in. But you mentioned Scottish. There's a language called Scots. So not Scottish. Scottish could be an accent, but it's not a language as such. There is a language called Scots, which is more on the east coast of Scotland. So I'm from the west coast. East coast, there are some areas where people speak Scots. But that was really looked on as a lower class language. So once you went to school, you would be punished if you
Oh,
spoke
really?
Scots. So there was a requirement to speak English. And that lasted a long, long time. And then I would say probably 20, 30 years ago, there was a kind of a revival where people
Mhm.
started to appreciate the language. There's lots of music and poetry and stories written in Scots. There's the cultural side of it. So languages in Scotland, it is interesting. You've got kind of three languages, and two of them have kind of been pushed to the side, and English comes in. Obviously, there's great advantages in speaking English. It gives you access to the wider world, but I think it's important to remember these other languages as well because it's an important part of the culture.
Yeah, exactly, of course. So three main languages are there in Scotland:
That's right.
Gaelic, Scots, and English,
That's
right?
correct. Yes.
But now English is widely spoken and everybody speaks English in Scotland as well, right?
Yes. Yes. Everybody speaks English. There are.
But see, let's say if somebody is uneducated, then what? Can they live in Scotland if they speak only Gaelic or Scots?
I would say there's only about. I think there are only about 60,000 people who speak Gaelic, and most of those people would be older people. It's an older generation who speak Gaelic regularly. Um, I'm sure there are some people who live their daily life and they only use Gaelic, but they are probably in small villages in the West Coast, on the islands, actually. Um, so I think to live your life, your daily life, you would have to speak English. Um,
Yes.
it's essential.
Yeah, exactly. But some people who are living in a village, like if I would
Mm,
compare people in my village, my grandparents, or like older people, so they don't really think that they should learn some other languages. They feel comfortable because they spent their whole life, right?
yeah.
Now they do not think, like if they're 60, 65, so why they are not thinking to speak English at this moment, right? There is no need.
Hmm.
So that's how it is. But yeah, but if you want to go outside of the country, or as you said, even though if you want to go to maybe London or some other cities of UK, then you have to speak English.
Hmm.
Otherwise, it would be like, suppose, like if somebody is there in London, and then if somebody like speaks this Gaelic or Scots, people are going to understand him? No.
Scots, probably people would understand Scots. That's because Scots has filtered into Scottish English a little bit. So there are some words that we've copied over from Scots that are not standard English. So words that we might use in Scotland in Scottish English, people in England might not understand.
Okay.
So a very simple example would be the word wee. So WEE, wee. That means
Hmm.
small,
Hmm.
and it's a very commonly used word in Scotland. But in England, people might not understand what you mean. But I think just talking about the use of Gaelic by older people, they love to speak Gaelic. They love to talk and laugh in their language. My mother always said that a joke told in Gaelic is always funnier than a joke told in English because there's this kind of shared culture that exists, and also the way the way the language works is different. So
Yeah,
it's important that
exactly.
we
Of
keep.
course, we can relate more. Like if it is our first language, for your parents, it was first language, right? And they still speak, as you said. So, of course, like, I can relate to it. Even though right now I'm able to speak English, but
Mm,
it does not mean I'm going to enjoy that much like I enjoy in Hindi. So I can understand jokes. That's
yes.
a different thing. But Hindi is, of course, Hindi, because that is the first language, my mother tongue, and For my parents, for sure, it would be the same. Maybe I can enjoy things in English, but not completely, because mother tongue is mother tongue.
Right. Yes, there's always a little bit of a barrier, a little bit of friction. That's true.
Yes. Okay. So coming to another question, when did you think of becoming an English teacher? Like it was your dream from childhood, or when you thought of becoming a teacher and going abroad and teach people?
Um, after I lived in Chile, I moved back to the UK, and I really wanted to travel. That was kind of my goal. I wanted to travel more, see more of the world. I had a great experience in South America, but I wanted to go somewhere very different. And at that time, I didn't know very much about Japan at all. I think today people know a lot. I think through the internet and social media, people know quite a
Yes.
lot about Japan. 20 years ago, there was no social media, so I knew very, very little about Japan, and it felt very different to me. So that was an interesting place for me to go. My initial plan was to maybe go to Japan for a year, teach English, and then come back to the UK and become a teacher. Not necessarily a language teacher, but a teacher of some kind at kind of middle school or high school level. But I ended up staying in Japan for 4 years. I enjoyed teaching English, and I enjoyed living in another country. One great thing about living in another country is you learn something new every day. Really, it could be a word, it could be a food you've never tried, it could be how to do something. You know, when you go
Exactly.
to a new country, even how do you use the bus service is something that you need to learn. And when you only live in your country, you forget that there's opportunities to learn something new every day. So I really enjoyed living in a very different culture and learning new things. But like I said to you before, um, I wanted to teach adults because it would allow kind of more advanced topics of discussion or things like that. Teaching the names for colors and animals and things was good fun for a few years, but I wanted to go up to more advanced English. So then I realized, okay, if I go and do a master's degree, then I can actually make this my career.
Exactly. Okay. I got it. So, okay. I think now you're running out of time and you have to go for your work, right?
Yes,
Okay, thank
yes.
you so much. Many, many thanks to you, Colin. It was really nice talking to you. I'm so happy to connect with you. And I enjoyed, of course, the whatever you told about Japan, your own country, language, many things we discussed. So it was really nice talking to you. Thank you so much. Many, many thanks to joining me today.
Not at all. It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for asking me to come and chat.
Yes, bye bye. Take
Thanks
care.
a lot. Bye bye.